All right. Hi, everyone. I am very happy to be here with some of the other panelists from earlier today, J.W. Verrett, Kurt Opsahl, Peter Van Valkenburg. I think you all know them from their earlier sessions today. I don't think we need to do a lot of introductions. Of course, I'm Paul Brigner, Electric Coin Company. We're here to wrap things up for this policy and regulatory discussion today with a panel on how can Zcash adapt and thrive in a hostile regulatory environment. And boy, I think we've got a great panel here to discuss that. And we've got a couple of opening questions where we can kick this off. I think it's nice to kick things off in a positive way. So I think these things always tend to feel a little bit negative when we're thriving in a hostile environment. So what's the best reason for us to have hope that the world does not, the question says, sleepwalk into the mire of totalitarian government? That's a fun way to put that. So let's look for hope, everyone. Who would like to take this one? Go ahead, Peter.
I can offer something. America, which
There you
sounds
go.
like a joke answer, given the news lately, the rather extraordinary aggression of both the SEC with respect to securities law enforcement and the DOJ now, which I think is actually scarier with respect to unlicensed money transmission enforcement. But I think that those overzealous prosecutions at some point are going to run hard up against the First Amendment. And this is not the case in a lot of other so-called open societies. And so if there's one of the many non-totalitarian open societies that I think is likely to, in the long run, vindicate the rights of people to build these tools and allow for their use, it's America, because we have this very strong legal reasoning tradition over these few words in the First Amendment that we don't abridge speech and the right to petition the government. Now, that doesn't answer all of our questions and solve all of our problems in any sense, because how good is a really well-built, cryptocurrency protocol for private money if there's no business that connects with the traditional financial system that will do the exchange? There's no app store that will share these free and open source software tools with the larger user base. But at the very least, it's the one thing that I tend to remain optimistic about. And maybe those other things can be solved through brilliant technology that can actually build tools that don't rely on those choke points, that are still user-friendly.
Yeah, that's a great way to start. JW, Kurt, other perspectives on that?
Sure. So, I mean, you opened with sleepwalking towards dystopia. And I think, one of the things that should give us hope is that we're not sleepwalking. There are many people who are paying attention, who are trying to make the world a better place, moving what, levers and tools they had. And, it's not going to be easy, right? Where we there are many competing forces in the world, some of which are wanting to have less privacy, more authoritarian tendencies. This is the dystopia that perhaps, where we could be going to if we were sleepwalking, but by paying attention, by working on it, we can make a difference. And I also, echo a bit what Peter was saying. The code is speech, and the free expression points of view in that. It is strong in the United States. But other countries have recognitions of freedom of expression that may not have been interpreted as strongly to protect the ability to express yourself through code. But the Inter-American Treaty on Human Rights that throughout Americas. So I guess still to your point of America, but in North and South America, there are provisions there that can be used, and I hope will be used to show that expression through code is covered as well by other international treaties or constitutions. So we have to work on this throughout the world.
I have hope because for one reason, because at the same time that these threats to privacy and privacy builders are very scary, and very scary even for people building on L1s that are very different from anything in the fact patterns of these actions. I also think that threats to privacy are what creates the demand for Zcash. So it's kind of like the quote from Band of Brothers. We're surrounded, sir. Yeah, we're paratroopers. We're supposed to be surrounded. We're privacy builders. We're supposed to be surrounded. But I think the only thing that's really going to create demand for privacy is threats to privacy. People don't know they need it until they feel it getting threatened. And the other thing is that I see more and more every day the wisdom of the original Zcash founders, in the transparent option and how that's protected us from delisting risk, how that's allowed Zcash to be listed and operate within a highly regulated, compliant environment, but also provides the option for shielded transfers that protect privacy. I think that design is that sweet spot, that small lane where a privacy project can grow, thrive, and challenge abuses of power, but at the same time maintain and thrive within highly regulated, centralized exchange environments. So I have hope. There's a fight ahead, but I have hope.
Yeah, JW, that point you made first there is something I was trying to touch upon in my presentation as well. Is like, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I feel like we are in a very difficult crisis situation, and it's sad, and I really hate that for the industry. But in a way, it does, I believe, highlight the value that we bring with Zcash and that the community has provided with Zcash. So what are your thoughts to the group here about how we can, in a very respectful way, take advantage of this opportunity to raise the profile of Zcash when the environment is so hostile, but yet we are the ones that provide the solution for people, especially those advocates in the human rights area. That's it's really been on my mind lately about, we have these organizations that are out there pushing Bitcoin hard, and I love Bitcoin, but I don't love it for its privacy preserving features and for protecting human rights advocates. What do you think about that? What ways can we take advantage of this situation that are appropriate?
Yeah, I think telling the good stories, not using the tongue-in-cheek tone that Samurai Wallet had on its Twitter feed. I mean, I love those guys, but that's not the right way to do that, I think. But the way we communicated, talking about the Fourth Amendment, talking about human rights activists. I remember Josh telling a story about remittances into Uyghur communities. Someone is using Zcash for that somewhere. Those are great stories. And I told a few of those last time I did a briefing on the Hill a couple of weeks ago. You do a great job, I think, of putting together coalitions of all sorts of people. And I've learned from some people who are using Zcash and other privacy tech for the kinds of human rights goals that your average person would say, "Oh, wow, that's a very nice thing." So yeah, I agree with you that telling those stories is important.
Yeah, I agree with JW. There's this unfortunate reality with respect to the legal and regulatory landscape wherein we live in an adversarial system. And that's actually really good in a lot of cases. Two parties struggling against each other in front of a neutral magistrate often leads to sort of pretty enlightened bottom-up ideas about the law, not somebody's top-down legislation, but rather, a judge who's seen people who have skin in the game argue. The problem is that when you have very aggressive prosecution, they're going to go after the worst offenders and offenders who are not sympathetic in front of a jury. And they're not going to go after the people who are doing the exact same thing, but in a less colorful or less aggressive or come at me, bro kind of way, right? I find it difficult to come up with that many factual differences between the work of, for example, the Zcash Foundation, where I'm on the board of directors, and the work that the Tornado Cash devs have done. There are some differences. They might be important from a legal standpoint as far as a charge of unlicensed money transmission or sanctions evasion or things like that. But the biggest difference, I think, that could matter is that, we're a incorporated US nonprofit that has made it its mission to do effectively nothing but produce free and open source privacy protecting software for the public good. And we don't profit off of it. We're a nonprofit. We would be an ideal candidate to vindicate our rights to produce this tool for the public good. And it would be hard for a prosecutor to paint our activities as somehow, grossly self-interested and indifferent to the minority of users who are doing bad things with this technology. Unfortunately, that's not you'd be bad at your job as a federal prosecutor if your first target was the most sympathetic defendant, right? And so it's an interesting question. I think we can keep doing the good work we're doing and be an example of how to be very careful communicating and very careful how we structure ourselves and the activities we do, limiting them to just publishing software and not engaging in other more direct activities that could trigger regulation. But maybe we also at some point need to think about something like a lawsuit for declarative judgment in a forum that might be more friendly. Like if they're going to go after bad actors and try to make bad law from bad facts, which is an old saying in legal academia, but a very true saying, then maybe we need to sort of push for some good law with some good facts. And I don't want to, I want to caveat what I just said. I don't think that the Tornado Cash developers were reckless or unnecessarily antagonistic in the way that they did their work. I don't know them personally, but looking at the facts in the indictment, I think things are being like prejudiced against them in the way the facts are being portrayed, and unfairly so. I don't know as much about the Samurai wallet developers or their case yet, and so I won't opine about them either. But I do think that if there's an example of an entity that has, I think pretty watertight messaging about this technology and goals that would be hard to impugn, the Zcash Foundation is one of those.
Try to expand on that a little bit. I mean, the fundamental thing is that good stories are important for explaining to policymakers, whether it's a judge looking over a case or a legislator or such, why it's important, and making human stories. So this is where we were starting on this. The story of an organization that is sympathetic, that needs to use a privacy enhancing tool to operate under an authoritarian regime, a difficult environment. It tells the story of why this is important, because the other story people are getting, whether it's through a prosecutor finding bad fake facts and moving forward, or a legislature who's taken something in the news and that, like, well, look at all these bad people who are using these kinds of technologies. So you have to counter that narrative and at least have people understand that the privacy enhancing technologies is about protecting fundamental freedoms, and move away from a narrative of it is about hiding crime or hiding terrorist activities. And this is a narrative that a lot of people who would like to have more control, more ability to detect what they consider to be bad acts, are really pushing for. And they want to find the narratives that tell their story. And in some case, it might be sincere. They're very concerned about Hamas or North Korea's activities. In other cases, it might be less sincere, where they say, well, we care about those things, but also the controls that we will get from this will be useful, because a lot of as a government, they trust themselves to use this wisely only for the good. And you may have strong disagreements about what that good is, but they're like, we would like to have all the information and then choose how to use it. And so getting those counter narratives out there, and picking the good facts. And like, as Peter was mentioning, in litigation, especially impact litigation, picking your cases with good or bad facts is very key. And, the government picks facts that are supporting their narratives. Civil liberties organizations, impact litigators, come more with facts about their narratives. And it's a challenge because a story just on this at one point I was working on Fourth Amendment protections for email. It's now been fairly well established. It was a little less clear then. found a great case where someone was relatively sympathetic. They had committed a crime, but it was a very minor crime, and the government was coming down to get all their email. And we went to go, say that you had to get a warrant for this. You couldn't do it warrantless. And they looked at the facts of the situation. Said, you know what? We'll get a warrant. Not to say that they're required to, just in this case, and the case is then mooted out, and get the precedent. Um, and I think courts are going to be very important because that is a place where you can explain some of these things and print a counter narrative. But sometimes that has to be through like amicus briefs, which I know Coin Center has done, and many other organizations in this community, industry groups have done, to present that narrative when the government has come forward and put the bad facts out there. And so an amicus brief is that opportunity to put counter narratives. And here's some other examples. It may also be good to try and find some positive examples to declaratory relief in courts, but also to present that to legislatures, get someone who's sympathetic in the legislature to bring in witnesses to talk about, here's how we use Zcash to fun things that you like, and why it's necessary to have this option for privacy to achieve goals that you think are important. And so that at least, that there is a tension to be resolved between this narrative of privacy versus security, or ideally get things pointed out that privacy and security go in hand, and so that to sort of move away from their trade-off narrative.
Yeah, those are all excellent points. And the one about the Zcash community and our entities being like kind of potentially very sympathetic defendants, where that you wouldn't want to go after us because we're really working for all of the right reasons, and likely would not be a successful attack. Though it occurs to me that not all privacy coins are the same, and it's kind of hard to separate ourselves at times. I think that you can point to things that do make us different, like JW, you just mentioned a second ago, the fact that we do have transparent capability, and that's a differentiator. But we might not always have that, right? That's one of the things under consideration for the roadmap is to potentially eliminate transparent capabilities in the project. And then we might have ZSAs that may have some ability to have compliance, and then others that may not. So I'm curious about what you all think about our ability to continually and ensure that we are staying in a place where we are differentiated. Because if we're not differentiated, does that mean that whenever another similar coin with similar characteristics gets attacked, we're going to be lumped in and inevitably attacked at the same time?
I want to just come out and say something that I've heard a lot of people say, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's worth pointing out. A lot of people say, oh, the reason why no one's come after Zcash devs, but they've come after Tornado Cash devs, is because no one uses Zcash. And I think I'd be wrong to say that there isn't some truth to that. Tornado Cash, I think, was the first major target of a DOJ lawsuit for conspiracy to launder money, conspiracy to do unlicensed money transmission, and conspiracy to violate sanctions. Three things that I don't think they did. Not really because of the bad facts issue that I described. And that would mean that it's not really our good facts that have helped us avoid those unjust prosecutions, but because Tornado Cash was extremely well used compared to any other privacy tool. Millions of dollars were going through Tornado Cash. Lots of very legitimate uses were documented. Vitalik famously donated a large amount of money to the war effort in Ukraine and used Tornado Cash to do so. But North Korea also moved large amounts of money through Tornado Cash, or arguably, it is alleged, did so. We're pretty sure that the Lazarus Group is North Korea, although that's probably a pretty fact-intensive inquiry that I certainly am not qualified to do. So I think that's a very real tension here. And I would caution against reading too much into that, but that's not a reason. That's certainly not a reason to keep Zcash not user friendly, because that way we avoid prosecution. Like, we need it to be even more user friendly. There's very hard questions about how can you make something more appealing to be used on a larger scale by more normal people without changing the facts in a way that would actually possibly start making the developers culpable. Like, if we were to actively centralize parts of the protocol to make them more user friendly and advertise them as a service to anybody and still do no active transaction monitoring or things like that, it's certainly not a foregone conclusion that we would fall into a regulated bucket and therefore be more likely to be on the wrong side of an unlicensed money transmission prosecution. But that's definitely part of the tension here. How can you make these tools intuitive and user-friendly without doing it by introducing centralization and responsibility for financial regulatory steps that would effectively defeat the purpose of the product, or the tool rather, right?
Yeah, really interesting. Other comments?
Oh, it's a rip. Oh, are we going to DW or?
Fine.
To riff off of that, I think that, well, first of all, JW's shirt there, privacy is normal, and normalizing it to have widespread adoption, I think actually could be a very, very helpful thing. I'll give an example out of the encrypted communications. There were a lot of accusations as that became a technology that was available more widespread in the 90s with PGP, and people were using it and they say, oh, well, this is something which is going to be used by criminals and drug dealers and all that. And over time, it became widespread used by ordinary folks going about their lives, texting their spouse about what they wanted for dinner that night and having it end-to-end encrypted. And this is in part because of having it be adopted by some of the major communication texting platforms. WhatsApp got several billion people sending encrypted messages to each other with just a flip of a switch to turn on the Signal protocol. Signal itself widely used for a lot of ordinary communications, iMessage and so on. And how does this help? I mean, like, looking at the case of WhatsApp, that it is very popular around the world, including in some governments who really don't want to have their citizens to be able to have unencrypted communications. But it is not a sign that you are a bad person because you have WhatsApp on your phone. If they, arrest somebody, look through their phone and find WhatsApp on there, that is not in and of itself a sign that they are bad people, because it has been normalized as being used by normal. So getting widespread adoption of Zcash as a technology so that people are able to use it and do use it for lots of everyday, ordinary financial transactions helps show that this is not. Because one of the challenges is often early adopters of some technologies are those who are more sketchy. That can be an unfortunate phase that allows for some opportunities to people to attack those, but you can get through that. Another example, the Tor project. The Tor browser provides a lot of strong privacy and security features. It is not, used by billions of people like WhatsApp, but it is used by a widespread of other people and used for a lot of positive purposes. And that also is something that has helped protect Tor from being attacked. I mean, people challenge some of the encryption things, but getting widespread usability, making it normalized and available to people who want to do normal things, helpful to make privacy as normal, and also that, normal is private. And if we can get to that where it is normal to have privacy in the transaction, that takes away some of that narrative that tries to shut these technologies down.
That's an interesting dilemma there, because Peter points out that it could be that we don't have the use, and then we do need the use on the other hand. So it's that's a tough nut to crack right there. Go ahead, JW. I think you had some comments.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I do think it. I don't think the government would have any success beyond the fact that Zcash is a community focused on individual rights and not interested in promoting crime and not used by criminals, at least now, would help us. But I also think the government wouldn't have any success going after a layer one just and the developers of a layer 1 protocol just for developing the protocol. That's not for lack of wanting to, but I mean, I've talked to DOJ prosecutor, one of the prosecutors at DOJ who led the welcome to video prosecution and that involved Bitcoin tracing that was featured in Treasures in the Dark. And he said, I'd love to take down Monero if I could, but I can't, man. They recognize they don't have the grounds to do that. They would love to go rogue prosecutor and try to take Monero down because they see it used in ransomware, but they can't. And they know they don't have the ability to do that. I do think as we enter a world in the future of ZSAs, and then ZSAs evolve into more, and we get to kind of a programmable private blockchain, there's potential for risk if we coordinate with anyone who's in the zone that could potentially be deemed a money transmitter. But yeah, I think the safe thing to do is, maintain the same distance that Bitcoin core devs did from people who built mixers on top of Bitcoin, or the distance between Ethereum Foundation and the Tornado Cash devs. They didn't coordinate. You build the road and then you step away and someone else builds something on top of the road, but you don't coordinate or enter into a joint agreement of any kind with them, then I think you're still in a safe place, even as your private L1 becomes programmable and becomes a wide variety of things rather than just the very simple thing that it is today.
I think I generally agree strongly with JW. I would caution, I do think there are a couple different regulatory angles that could lead to it being easier for prosecutors to target L1s. And I think the most notable is the Tornado Cash sanctions. They identify a series of smart contract addresses that are not under anyone's control, nor do they enrich anyone specifically. And yet they add these smart contract addresses to the SDN list and say Americans are now banned from interacting with these smart contracts. Coin Center, my organization for public policy in crypto, is suing Treasury, saying that goes beyond your statutory authority. You can't add to the SDN list. You can't sanction things that are neither persons nor the property of persons. However, we may not win that lawsuit. We didn't win at the district level, and we're appealing. There's another lawsuit in Texas being sponsored, being funded, I think, by Coinbase. There's a number of independent plaintiffs there. They also did not win on the district level. Hopefully they'll win at the appellate level. At least with 2 lawsuits, we have double the chances for one of us to win, which would matter most, because then you get a nationwide injunction and you get a circuit split, and maybe it goes up to the Supreme Court, which is hopefully sympathetic. That said, we could both lose. And if we both lose, the precedent there is very interesting, because if they can add Tornado Cash in the abstract and all of the smart contract addresses that are the immutable smart contracts that process those transactions to the OFAC list, then it's hard to see why they couldn't add Zcash in the abstract to the sanctions list and all of the software and operation of that software, thereby banning Americans from using it. So at that point, it would probably still be hard to go after the actual developers of the protocol. So that's where I agree with you, JW, but it would effectively mean that you could design this thing, you could spend all this time maintaining these software libraries, but no one would ever be allowed to use it in America without facing felony prosecution. And that would be interesting.
Well, I would certainly hope the court wouldn't go to endorse that as a full ban of any technology, but indeed, it's a risk.
All right. Well, hey, I want to thank the community because we're getting some good questions coming in. We've got, I think, an hour more for this conversation, so please keep the questions coming. I do see them, and I want to weave them in as best I can. One thing that I actually wanted to cover a little bit more in my talk that I failed to do was to talk about what I would like to see the community do to help influence the policy and regulatory environment. And that came in as a question, what can community members do to advocate for favorable policies and influence regulatory perspectives? I know that, like, I've seen over the past year, Stand with Crypto, the organization that was started by Coinbase, now it's an independent organization that is more of a grassroots type organization. People can join and participate there, reach out to their policymakers. I think that is a great thing to do, actually. I think that, the more that we can get out of our small community and kind of break out of our echo chamber, because it does become that way sometimes when we're just talking amongst ourselves, and talk to other people in crypto. That really does a lot for our cause. And but I'm open to, and I'd love to hear other ideas about what, and I think the community would love to hear what should they be doing? How can they support our efforts?
I'm going to start with a shameless plug. Point Center, which, as I said, is suing on the sanctions issue, is also suing on 6050I, which is I think, privacy violating and Fourth Amendment violating tax reporting requirement that's going into effect this year. We are a nonprofit. We rely on donations to continue operating. We would love to do more work, and for that we would need more donations. I'll also, to make it less selfish, point out that there were 3 organizations that filed very good, I think, amicus briefs in the Tornado Cash criminal prosecution, where Roman Storm and Roman Semenov are defending themselves from these charges. Coin Center, the DeFi Education Fund, filed an excellent brief, also focusing on sanctions laws, but also the money laundering charge. And the Blockchain Association also filed an excellent brief focusing on the unlicensed money transmission charge. We worked together, our 3 organizations, to make sure that we weren't overlapping, because the last thing you want to do is waste the judge's time as she reads these briefs in the hopes of better understanding the technology and the applicable law. And I think the 3 of them together made for very formidable arguments to buttress the defense team's already very good motion to dismiss the charges. So if you're a company in this space, I would suggest you look into joining the Blockchain Association. They're a very effective trade association in this space. And if you're looking to make a donation to a more mission-driven organization, DeFi Education and Coin Center are doing, I think, important work.
I'd like to echo all of that. That's a really important point. And by the way, if you want to follow these groups, I know that the DeFi Education Fund puts out, I think it's a weekly update that talks about some really important developments and policy every week. And of course, Blockchain Association's out there doing a lot on social media, really good information. And we know that, Peter is publishing some amazing work on a regular basis that I always love to get those updates. They're just, so much substance there that is fantastic. So it's one thing if you just want to be up to date on everything. Those organizations are great to follow. And by the way, they also, almost every breakfast I have, the Blockchain Association is there, DeFi Education Fund's been there, Peter's been there, so tune into those too, just to be aware of what's going on. So Kurt and JW, other thoughts about that? How can people engage and contribute?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of ways to engage them. I think as an initial point, I talked a little bit about this in my presentation earlier, but get informed and get involved. That's subscribing to some of these newsletters, going to websites that cover it, read the press that covers these issues. You can also read mainstream media, because they also will cover things from a slightly different perspective. Get an idea of what is going on, and then what can you do about it? Well, one, as an individual, you can get involved by reaching out to your representatives and let them know that this is something you care about. I think for a lot of representatives, they care deeply about what their constituents think about things. And if somebody takes the time to call them up or goes to DC and set a meeting, something like that, go to the local office, that means someone cares a lot. And if this is a voter and they care that much, that means something to most legislators. And you can, other things like signing a petition or submitting that, those can also work. But the more effort you put into it, that is going to be read and understood by the legislatures and their staff that you're talking to as the importance of it. So figure out who are your representatives in your particular jurisdiction. So one of the first questions they'll ask you is, where are you from, to make sure that you actually are one of their voters, and then let them know it's important. And for a lot of, the wide variety of issues that come up that will affect how people will vote and what their legislatures will do. And so if you are particular emphasis on some of these fundamental rights issues that are embedded in the policies around cryptocurrencies and blockchains. Explain that to the legislature, that this is, not just a niche thing and that most people will vote based on other issues, but like for you, it really matters that somebody cares about this and the reasons why. So getting involved there. On the other side, and this is, I think, supporting Coin Center, supporting the Blockchain Association, DeFi Education Fund. There are other groups that work on this. If you want to have the most effectiveness, you will need some people whose job it is to look at these things, read about it, write up a brief, get it submitted, do the work that some of it requiring specialist work, legal briefs in particular, writing responses to a notice of proposed rulemaking or a European Union consultation. There are lots of opportunities which are best done by organizations with expertise who can advocate on your behalf. So support those organizations. Do what you can, and if you can make a financial donation, good. If you're working at a company, advocate to your leadership about why this is important, and see how you can to try and make your voice be heard through others. And I guess finally, spread the news, spread the word to your friends, your family. Like, why do you care about this thing? And see if they care about it as well. And maybe you can infect just two people with this notion of preserving our privacy is fundamental to our future. But then maybe they'll talk to their friends and they'll tell two friends and so on, right? Get more people to be concerned about it. And I think a lot of people out there actually are very concerned about privacy, and they want to have more privacy, but they feel a little bit nihilistic about it. Like, what are you going to do? Privacy, so much work. And so try and encourage them, give them that strength to not be nihilist, to say that we can do this and we have to work together to try. If people are given easy choices, so they can choose to have more privacy or less privacy, they will pick privacy almost all the time. I mean, basically, unless you really want to get your message out in the world where you don't want any privacy about it because you want to get the widest read, you probably want to default private. But getting to that point, actually doing privacy effectively, having all corporations tracking you all over the web, but who's listening into unencrypted phone calls on the exchanges and so on and so forth, that people might feel disheartened. So give them that heart, so more people care about it.
On that point about onboarding, I tell you, the Zashi wallet has just really unlocked a whole new opportunity from my perspective there, because it just feels like something that I feel very comfortable sharing that with a friend or family member and sending them some ZEC, and then they experience what you just described. They see that it is possible, and that was something that was pretty hard for me to do before, to be quite honest. I mean, I know that there were wallets out there, and I respect them, but I didn't have the same comfort level of sharing those. So and I'm so excited about the potential for future developments like liberated payments, so we can just send Zcash in a text message or something like that. That, to me, that would just be a massive unlock for onboarding people and making the usability so much better. So you're up, JW. Sorry about that. Just had to interject.
Yeah. Moderator's privilege. Just to echo, love you, Coin Center. Love your work, Peter V. I read it sometimes and I'm like, yeah, like I'm alone, fist bumping in the room. And BA's been great. Def's been great. I think it's good to just vocalize threats to privacy and just retweet stuff. There's an unfortunate tendency, I think, in the crypto policy community to put privacy on the back burner and to focus on the SEC stuff, fixing the SEC stuff, and the kind of crowd that thinks, well, let's just get it all housed under CFTC and then we'll fix all these problems, which is wrong for so many reasons. One of which is that if you are an FCM, if your DeFi protocol is an FCM, it has to KYC. So that's not what I want to live in, and that's not a protocol I'm interested in using, and I'm not sure I understand the purpose for it. For example, right now, Senator Tillis put forward the Enforce Act. The idea is this is a crypto AML kind of bill that's designed to be better than Liz Warren, more chewable, more digestible. But it addresses issues in the news, but it's not heavy-handed like Liz Warren. Okay, but it does have a significant enhancement of special measures authority for FinCEN, which could be used in exactly the same way Peter was describing in similar fashion to sanctioning an address, but even easier for them to do it. I mean, I think if they're given the special measures authority, I'm not sure there's any way to challenge it. So that bill is very, very, very dangerous to my perspective, and I think it's worth just pushing back and making sure that he knows that, look, you think you're appealing to kind of the crypto community with this Elizabeth Warren light bill, but you're not, man. Kill this thing, light it on fire. The Enforce Act. Sorry, that's one of my hobby horses.
Yeah, there have been some really bad bills, and JW, I know you always point them out, and I really appreciate that you
I
do
think
that.
you're the only one who appreciates that.
Well, yeah, well, I mean that goes to one of the questions here. So one of the questions in the chat was about making compromises, and like some of these bills are actually somewhat appealing to some of the trade associations and other groups that are looking for ways to like make a small compromise that would help us make progress, perhaps with moving something else along with it. Like if a stable coin might get a little traction, or with the Fit 21 bill might get a little traction, then maybe would give in on some of these other things. But I think that I'm just finding here the question that came through. When we talk about Zcash adapting, if we do so, are we going to lose our identity and purpose entirely? Like how much can we adapt and still maintain our values?
I mean, I don't think so. So maybe I don't understand the question, but I don't think anyone's ever suggested that Zcash becomes some sort of like AI monitored, fully KYC'd chain where nobody can send a transaction message on the network without first being like approved by a financial institution, right? So like I don't think anyone suggested that. I think adapting, as far as this goes to what I was saying earlier, like how do we get more usability and more active participants and make the thing like more popular. That is hard because I think there's this tendency in crypto, and we see it a lot. We see it a lot in Ethereum, I think, because Ethereum's got this like constant metric of total value locked for a DeFi protocol or for a layer 2 or things like that, and there's this race to get total value locked, and the race has little to do with the underlying technology often, and more to do with like business development and paying users to use the tech, like airdrops and rewards and these sorts of things. And that kind of behavior is thankfully not something that's prevalent in the Zcash space. But maybe that's also why nobody uses Zcash, quote unquote, which is the criticism we get sometimes. I would not want to see that behavior start up here, because that does lead to some very real securities law issues, wherein, you know, you've basically taken what was a neutral technology and turned it into a sort of multi-level marketing scheme. So that's one area where I would not want to see us adapt in a way to get more users by simply playing sort of like growth hack games, which is a problem not just in the crypto space, it's also a problem in the general technology space. Like I read an excellent article about why Google's terrible now, and it's because they started optimizing for clicks and the number of search queries. So like, we don't want to give you the best results for the first query, because we want you to have 6 more queries. It's like, that's a terrible way to design a project. Anyway, yeah, I'm rambling now.
Anytime you optimize for a metric, then when you're trying to use that metric to measure something else, it may be that people move to the metric instead, right? That becomes the goal as opposed to what the metric was supposed to measure, which is often a different goal. But I think I would hit back, to I guess some of the bigger picture here on this tension between compromising, keeping true, that kind of thing. And one is that you may have heard this phrase, politics is the art of the possible. Like especially in legislative worlds, there's a lot of deal making, and you give me this, I'll give you that, and maybe not everybody's completely satisfied, but it's the best deal that was possible to move things forward. And I think that there is a place for finding the areas of compromise, but like you can't compromise on fundamental rights. You can't compromise on what are the sort of core values, but you can compromise on other things that might be less important to like who you are and what you're doing. And that is a tension that has to be sort of worked out into some of these bills. And oftentimes it is hard to see how this will do. Like you could have some compromises where the proposed compromise, and you see this often in bills, is that this power will be given to government agency and such, but they're going to be cool about it. Like, don't worry, like they will only use it in the right circumstances and not use it against the people that you like. And I think that's one of those very tough compromises that makes me very uncomfortable, because things could change where the power exists, but they're being cool about it may change. And even if they are the coolest and they're going to be only using this against thing everyone would agree would be evil and not bothering anybody else, another country will look at that law, that power being given, and say, we should do the same thing, but they will make different decisions about it. So like sometimes it's hard to see how will this compromise your core values? Will it not? But there may be other ways to go forward. Like, one of the things I'm optimistic about, and I love out of this community, about lots of other places in blockchain, using things like ZK proofs to say, like, look, we have a system which will give the piece of information that is required, that is necessary, but not extraneous other information while you're doing, and be able to prove that up. And that, ZK proofs are being used for a wide variety of things, but that is one of them that gives this opportunity of a compromise in a sense, but it's a compromise of only what you are legally entitled to have and no more, and preserving some of like the personal identity privacy of someone. So it is a compromise that can be used in a way that doesn't compromise core values, but moves things along into a space where I don't know, the classic example, is going into a bar. They need to know one thing about you, whether you over the drinking age of that jurisdiction. They don't need to know anything else. So a compromise that protects your privacy pretty well is a yes or no answer to whether or not you are of legal age, and then that's all the information. So you're giving some things up, but you're not compromising the core values of privacy. So there may be ways to get through this through technology, maybe ways getting through this through policy, but I think that there can be ways, but you have to keep true along the way.
I am fine with choice, with options. I'm fine with people who want to build at the intersection of TradFi and crypto, and want to build something, that's like a quasi-regulated exchange that sells crypto and that's kind of custodied. And I'm not going to interact with that as a customer, because I know that it misses the whole point of crypto. But my grandma will only, interact in that fashion. That's fine. It's the bans that worry me, and so I'm fine for compromise that provides optionality in the securities commodity spaces. What I hate is bans, and what I hate is AML, because I've seen AML grow like a weed in so many different areas. If you want to think dystopian, take a look at the Incorporation Transparency Act, which is insane. The thing is insane, where you start an LLC, and it's not just the founder of the creator of the LLC has to file their name and identifying information. It's anyone who has substantial influence over the LLC, which means you don't even necessarily have to be an owner, and you don't know if you have to file or not. And there's a 3-year criminal penalty associated with misfiling, and all of that to go after drug money laundering that uses real estate. But those people are not going to fill out the form anyway. So it's just a dystopia. So that's how that regime works, and that's how it grows. So on that, no compromise. On that, zero compromise. But optionality is fine. For example, I think building this transparent only receipt function for exchanges to help protect from delistings was fine, because I don't care about that as long as I can maintain the ability to do shielded transactions. And that doesn't affect that at all. In fact, it's kind of stupid, because if I want to send to an exchange for some reason, just create a kind of burner transparent address to take it from, and then otherwise have all that pre-exchange activity shielded as well. So it was the discussion in the privacy community about this, a criticism, was just kind of dumb. That optionality type building is fine to kind of conform one of the tentacles of Zcash to the regulated environment, as long as we protect the shielded transaction ability. Yeah. So, but on AML, KYC legislation, no compromise, take no prisoners, and when someone crosses the line, throw the arrows at them. That's how I view it.
Well, on this topic,
I
okay.
might have a small disagreement with JW here,
Okay.
just to make the panel a little spicy, but probably not a big disagreement. I think it's from my perspective, it's important when thinking about legislative strategy, and this goes to what Kurt was saying earlier as well, that we never try and advocate for special pleading. Like somehow crypto it's just, I do think it's a better technology than the legacy financial technologies like credit cards and ACH and things like that. But just because it's a better technology doesn't mean it should get special treatment in the eyes of the law. And I think where there is an opportunity for compromise often are in the few areas where actually we do still get some special treatment in the law. And those are interesting areas. I've brought this up a couple times. It hasn't ended up in a bill yet, but it's a unique, strange fact of the world that a regulated financial institution, when someone withdraws $10,000 or more, has to file a currency transaction report, a CTR, under the Bank Secrecy Act. We can debate the merits of that. As someone who likes privacy, I find it in some ways alarming that even though you've done nothing wrong, there's a report about you being triggered, but it is a large amount of money. It's $10,000. Used to be larger when the law was originally written back in the 1970s, and now it's actually a fairly small amount compared to that. But that is to say, like, that is a law that's on the books, CTRs. And it was even found constitutional in the context of the transactions of the day in California Bankers Association versus Schultz. Because the definition of currency in the currency transaction report statute and associated regulations is limited to monetary instruments as defined as like the currency of a country or of a nation, when you withdraw $10,000 or more of crypto from Coinbase, who is a regulated financial institution under the Bank Secrecy Act, it doesn't trigger a currency transaction report. Now, it probably triggers a suspicious activity report, a SAR report, but that's sort of at the discretion of Coinbase. And so there is this interesting gap where cryptocurrency gets slightly less surveillance than traditional monetary instruments when you withdraw them from your financial institution. If there was to be a bill that came up in Congress that said, we just want to fill that gap so there's a level playing field between what happens surveillance-wise when you withdraw dollars versus what happens when you withdraw crypto, I think that would be a reasonable compromise, because I generally want to argue for at least equal treatment with traditional financial, with the traditional financial system. And ideally, we would get something in return also that, like, where we have burdens in this space, like pernicious uncertainty about the degree to which doing activities on these networks is money transmission or not. Maybe we could get, okay, centralized institutions have to file electronic CTRs for virtual currency withdrawals, but we'll get more robust clarity in the statute that non-custodial activities on this platform are not money transmission. That would be a very good compromise. And that is maybe within the art of the possible. That would be pretty optimistic. But I think that's a good area for compromise. And I would even say that the Enforce Act, as it ultimately was released in the discussion draft, 311 authority, which is this primary money laundering concern, is a broad authority that can be abused. I would argue that FinCEN's attempt to define all transactions with unhosted wallets as primary money laundering concerns under their 311 authority is an example of that abuse. So you're absolutely right, JW, that it can be abused. The fact is that 311 authority is pretty broad and flexible with regard to the traditional financial transactions, and the 311 authority envisioned in the Enforce Act is really, again, sort of putting us on an even playing field with the way those traditional financial institutions are regulated and subject to that authority. And I would add that it's also a duplicitous regime with sanctions. So I think just about anything that they would want to do using their 311 authority, they could probably already do using their sanctions authority. although there might be more ways to fight them on the sanctions authority. But with 311, including as it's defined, the new powers in the Enforce Act, you get a notice and comment rulemaking process that would allow us at least to have some say in the process. Whereas sanctions, there's no notice and comment for new sanctions. Just sort of come down from on high and hit you in the head. And you're like, oh, now what do we do? So anyway, I think reasonable minds can disagree here. I don't want to pick a fight with JW. I didn't mean to do that here. But I think the general message I'm trying to push here is if you're in this space and you're trying to think about like what should I really get riled up about, it's as JW said, actually, it's the bans, it's the overt attempts to specially treat crypto in the negative that are problematic. And when people are out there making, I think, too much of a fuss about, say, the ambiguity in the Howey test, I think we sometimes do ourselves a disservice. Like, that's why I'm glad Zcash never did an ICO, because I think ICOs actually do pretty clearly fit within the Howey test, and that's a reasonable threshold for when you should be regulated as the issuer of a security. And so I would take issue with someone saying, well, we'll not compromise on this. Crypto issuance, even if it's from a centralized party, should never be treated as securities issuance. I don't think. I think there are certain areas where we can actually agree with the SEC.
Well, on the issue of compromises, we've had a couple of questions come in from the community, and I know, Peter, you touched on this a little bit in your talk earlier, but we have a question asking about our take on privacy pool style solutions. Even though a privacy pool proof reveals less than just handing over your viewing key, does proof of innocence somehow shift the paradigm towards more eager compliance? And I think they actually had another one on privacy pools that was similar. Someone said they're very wary. It's a slippery slope and better kept out of an L1. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Even Tornado Cash had a compliance tool, and I would have been perfectly fine with the rule at all centralized exchanges being, we're not going to take your money from a Tornado Cash address unless you show us your proof from the compliance tool that you were the one who put the money in the pool. And we can then, we alone can then divine sort of the background history of those flows of funds to show that they're not North Korean or hackers or any number of other things. I think that's an interesting model. You get something very similar from, we're only going to accept your Zcash deposits if they come from transparent addresses, or if it's a shielded transaction, you got to share a view key with us or something like that. Now, there might be interesting differences between those two examples from a technical standpoint that could be worth discussing, but maybe we won't unpack those now. Privacy pools is a little different in that the size of the anonymity set can be in flux. And if the vast majority of users on the protocol decide to exclude someone from the anonymity set, that person effectively gets none of the benefits of privacy from the protocol. So you get this sort of almost like Elinor Ostrom governing the commons emergent order of users deciding who actually gets privacy or not, which Elinor Ostrom would have been the first to point out that sometimes commons governance systems can be really good bottom-up ways to organize important matters of public good and policing public bad in the example that we're talking about right now, maybe. But they can also be really nasty because they can sort of become popularity contests, and the minority might be, righteous, but if the majority wants to exclude them from the benefits of the commons and the commons governance system, then they're shit out of luck, basically. I don't think Elinor Ostrom said shit out of luck, but that's essentially the conclusion. And so, this is the problem with privacy pools, or the virtue of privacy pools as a proposal. I actually tend to lean in favor of the privacy pool proposal being in general a good thing in the world. Would I want to see it adopted into the Zcash L1? I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that, and I actually haven't seen anyone propose that, but maybe it has been proposed. But I do like that there's new experiments with how to build systems that sort of achieve some balance between denying criminals the benefit of privacy, while ensuring that innocent people and reasonable people have the benefit of privacy, recognizing that there's all kinds of potential problems in who you define as criminal, because who China defines as criminal, I might define as actually just like not a patriot, a defender of civil liberties and civil rights. So that's a big discussion, but in general, I like these new approaches. My biggest concern with privacy pools is not whether it's a good technology for privacy or not, or whether it will abuse minorities who deserve privacy but are denied it because they're excluded from the anonymity set, which is, I think, the most salient technical concern. My problem is that it's not actually going to help with regulators. I think there's this assumption that if you create these methods of self-policing internal to the technology, that regulators will suddenly be okay with it. The fact of the matter is, North Korea could still send money to the privacy pool. Some people who define their anonymity set broadly to include them and don't exclude them will mix with them, if you will, or will be in the pool with them. And the end result is someone at the DOJ is going to be looking at Chainalysis for Ethereum and watch as the money hits this smart contract address, might be able to more easily determine where it went next, but may not really care and may just say, that thing, that's the thing we sue next. That's the thing we put on the SDN list next. I don't care if there's a bunch of people who aren't allowing their anonymity set to extend to those. They got the benefit of some privacy by using the system. The system was supposed to be permissioned. It was supposed to be gated, because that's to sort of be reductionist here. That's the world that a lot of, I think, people who don't like cryptocurrency want to see. They want to see a permissioned financial system where large corporations with so-called legitimacy are the gatekeepers of international financial flows. And they have many reasons to want that. And some of those are good reasons and some of those are bad reasons. But privacy pools doesn't give them that, even if privacy pools does attempt to address this issue of anonymity for bad actors.
Good answer. Any other comments on privacy pools? Okay, let's move on. I have this question, a couple questions here that I'm going to try to put together. And in my mind, they relate to developing allies in the technology policy arena. One of the questions that came through is, how can we best leverage the historic fights over strong encryption to exemplify both the legitimacy of privacy tools and as a great enabler of the economy? Amazon wouldn't exist without SSL, which wouldn't exist without strong encryption. I think the same is true for cash for the internet. And I've actually thought about this a lot. I worked in internet policy for a long time. Many of you guys did too before getting into crypto. So it's really bothered me deeply that some of the organizations that I truly respect, the ones I've worked for in the past, are not aligning with crypto. And I've gone out of my way. And in fact, that is why I do the Global Encryption Day event, is because I see that as a bridge opportunity to work with some of those organizations. And I've had some success with that. But to be honest, it's been me pulling hard to make those things happen. It hasn't been so natural. And I feel that there's some underlying hesitation there. So yeah, how can we leverage those fights? And I want to add to this too. There's another question that came in that is kind of somewhat related that you might want to add in, that said, due to the recent changes back to net neutrality, have any correlating effects to the things discussed here today? So, I don't know if you link that together. I kind of do. I worked in the net neutrality space for a long time as well. So again, trying to bring all these tech policies together that one would think we would be close and aligned, but I don't know if that's true. Thoughts?
Well, I think this is as I say, we've also been in this space for a long time, and I think there definitely are points of overlap in the encryption space, in particular, like what Peter was talking about earlier, for putting into the Tornado Cash brief some code to speech stuff that came from the encryption fights, the fights that brought you Amazon through SSL, and also brought you messaging with encryption. And so certainly there are lessons that can be learned by how some of those fights worked and what was successful. Keeping in mind that was also a multi-year struggle, so it won't necessarily. The encryption wars are not over. These fights are still being contended right now, but there could be synergies from that on policy positions and where there is that overlap. I think as well, though, my experience has been with a number of these communities. They come from a crypto skeptic starting point. And it's part of it is to explain why and how fundamental rights are at issue, rights that are core to those organizations and how it works. And it's not about like emphasizing this makes a new financial environment that is be wonderful for commerce more, but like this is about how these tools can be used to fund opposition groups and fund civil liberties, work elsewhere, like trying to draw that in. Also, one of the things I work on a lot and a supporter of is the decentralized web as a way of putting more power into the hands of the people and move away from centralized points of control. And there are a lot of fundamental rights and civil liberties that are enhanced or easier to protect when you're in a decentralized web environment. And many projects within the decentralized web use blockchain technologies as part of how they are doing that. But the story that is going to resonate is about this end goal of a decentralized future without a few major technology companies sort of running the show with central points of failure. It is the what is the end goal that we have in common with it, and then how can we get there through technology. So it's maybe a way of framing and getting to find out what people are interested in those communities and try to see the benefits that can resonate with them as well as with our own community.
Any other perspectives on that? I need help with this issue.
When you raised net neutrality, and I guess somebody asked a question specific about net neutrality.
Yeah, they did. It was due to the recent changes back to net neutrality potentially have any. Yeah, do the recent changes back to net neutrality potentially have any correlating effects to the things discussed here today? So, yeah,
Net
just trying to link
neutrality,
that.
yeah, net neutrality is one of those interesting issues that sort of breaks these coalitions. Interestingly, I think. I mean, I don't know. I might have been on the opposite side of this from Kurt and a few other. I don't mean to judge. I really don't. And it's an interesting issue. But personally, I was very wary of the way the net neutrality discourse was going back like 6, 7, no 10, 11 years ago, actually, I guess, because there was this evil perceived in the world, which is that ISPs are powerful corporations that are very centralized. So they're going to start giving people tiered internet access, and you're only going to be able to watch Netflix. You won't be able to watch like videos on YouTube. The reality is we all ended up watching Netflix and YouTube only, not because of some 1984 world where you're forced to watch this stuff, but rather just through sort of like the natural motions of Pareto laws and capitalism, where like everybody just ends up going to the best design platform, and then they get network effects, and then they start excluding others. And that's sort of inevitable. And the best answer to that is new competitors and new technologies. So like the antitrust problem is I don't think we should improve the government's power to break up corporations. I think we should improve the market's ability to challenge those corporations when they become lethargic and disgusting. Like the problem with Google being this giant corporation that doesn't actually care about providing good search results anymore and instead wants to just monetize clicks. The solution is to decentralize Google, and that new decentralized competitor may one day itself become kleptocratic and expropriatory, but maybe it'd be harder because the technology would be better, or maybe it would just be then replaced by another entity. In the net neutrality context, the idea that we would just hand the FCC really broad authority to control the traffic that ISPs can and cannot send over their servers, yeah, that might be one way to make sure that they treat all packets equally, but it might also unwittingly open the gates to them controlling packets in general, which from an internet freedom standpoint could be just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than the corporate ISPs trying to do that in a piecemeal basis. Anyway, this highlights maybe some very complicated issues that emerge within technology policy. And I'm not saying my position on net neutrality is obviously right. It's a very nuanced issue. But it does show that there are sort of really interesting coalitions that form between sort of more left libertarians and more progressive liberals, and the occasional conservative in there that's just caring about deplatforming, even though they would probably recoil at the idea of like permissionless global private money. And so I guess this comes back to like, how can we work together? We need to sort of stay focused on sort of core values, I think, that do create these awkward but sometimes very fruitful coalitions. It's amazing that for most of Coin Center's history, cryptocurrency issues have been primarily bipartisan. Like we've had enemies on both sides and we've had champions on both sides. It is alarming that I think in part because of the high visibility of Elizabeth Warren's negative stance on crypto, it's starting to look a lot more like a Republican Democrat type issue. Like Democrats hate crypto, Republicans are okay with crypto, and a few of them like it. That's not a good direction to keep going in. It can be good in years where the Republicans control the House, Senate, and the presidency, and it can be very bad in years when they don't. You don't want your issue to be partisan. So I think one area where we could do good as a community is by highlighting sort of like genuine cases of this technology improving on the margins issue areas that historically progressive Democrats care about. And that would be things like antitrust, actually. So, like, if someone wants to build a decentralized Google on top of Zcash using ZSAs and programmability that one day will be available, and it'll be private and protect the the otherwise very intimate and invasive search histories of its users, they should build that and they should market it and lobby for it in Congress as an answer to a lot of the problems that the FTC would otherwise try and address through its anti-competitive policies or its consumer protection policies.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Kurt.
yeah, so yeah, net neutrality debate is interesting, and I think we could go off on a long tangent there, but I'll sort of try and
Yeah, I
step it
did
up
that for 10 years.
on
I'm sure. So
a couple of levels. So first, I think a great way to deal with centralization and big companies is to create an environment in which competitors can come in and displace them. Network effects often make that very challenging to do. But you can get hopefully also on a bipartisan consensus that if you want to deal with overly centralized entities, that having a competitor come along and creating a competitive marketplace is a good end goal, and how you get there, whether it is through enforcing rules with agencies or just providing the environment which innovation can thrive. You could have different degrees on that, but I think that is at least an opportunity, is that like have an agreement that it would be a good thing to have a competitive environment in a lot of these places, and push towards that idea, the decentralized web or Web3 world, where you have more of these competitors able to do it. I would also say that like one of the things historically that has displaced a very powerful monopolist player or a dominant player at least in this space is a paradigm shift. So IBM was a dominant player in computers until Microsoft realized the operating system is what mattered. Microsoft was trying to keep that when the browser came along, because they came to the realization the browser is what mattered, but that didn't save them from that future. Then Web 2 comes along, where people are building things like Facebook, which is on a browser, but is its own ecosystem, and it doesn't matter what browser you use to be on that, and so on, right? A lot of times when there is true a competitive environment is with a technological paradigm shift, and that is one of the things that can sometimes be offered through cryptocurrency and blockchain related projects as a way of displacing those entities without necessarily resorting to antitrust lawsuits, but through competition. So maybe convince policymakers and others that creating a environment that allows for innovation can do so. And then to swing it back to privacy, a lot of the concerns that people have, legislators and ordinary folks, is about the privacy invasions of the large internet companies who are monitoring their traffic and so on, the consumer privacy end of it. And so as a way to, make that is you could have more privacy focused technologies that come from this decentralized space, allow people other options, interoperate with other, and sometimes that might be through technologies that make some of the big players uncomfortable that people do, or maybe replicating these things, but get to that decentralized world where we have them out, and then depending on who's saying it and who's listening, you may have different methods of getting there, but at least let's get an agreement that that is where we want to go.
I don't think broad coalition building is possible when it comes to private money. We have on the one side national security Republicans who kind of fundamentally disagree with everything we're doing. And you have on the other side Democrats who are for criminal justice reform, except if it's anything under the range of white collar, in which case, let's just burn them alive in the public square and we'll all go watch. That's kind of their view. And money laundering falls under that. So those wide coalitions will never reach. But we can be very successful in killing bills. It's a lot easier to kill a bill than to pass it. And I don't think anything major crypto reform is going to pass in the next few years. So we develop small tactical teams. We go in with whatever allies we can get. It might be ACLU, it might be Trump, truckers, whatever it is. A small tactical team just tight enough to go in, get a kill shot, and get the hell out of there. Metaphorically speaking, public policy speaking. Small tactical team to wreck stuff coming through where most of the crypto industry says, oh, let's just go ahead and compromise and maybe we'll have a little bit of light KYC for DeFi protocols. It'll be fine, not a big deal. We'll spot authority to CFTC. No, tactical team go in and take it out, destroy, and just buy more time to build and get mass adoption.
Nice. Okay, good. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that a little bit, see if I can figure out how to do some advocacy around that approach. Hey, we've got a technical question that came in. I think it's really interesting. It might take us a minute to dissect this and answer it if we can. I can't, so I hope maybe you can. We've got about 15 minutes left. Let's see how it goes. The Zcash protocol does not require shielded addresses to be public. They can be shared secrets between some participants, and this has significant additional security advantages. For example, resistance to quantum attacks. What interaction does that have with regulation? And is it a feature that regulators can't put addresses on a sanction list that they don't know? So there's a lot there. And I'm really curious if anybody would be able to explain a little bit more to everyone, like, how does it matter that we can have these addresses, the Z addresses that are shared secrets, and what are the implications for quantum, first of all, because that's mentioned in the question. And then let's talk about what does that mean for regulations and the sanctions list.
I can't speak on the quantum computing issue. Perhaps that's an obvious, because I'm a lowly lawyer and certainly not a cryptographer.
I was counting on you, Peter.
That sounds really cool, though.
That's
and
why I had to ask this question.
I'm gonna ask Ian Myers the next time I go climbing with him about that one. So, all right, the sanctions list. I've talked about this before. I talked about this a little bit in my talk earlier. There's something that appears easier if OFAC is in fact empowered to put things that aren't actually the property of a sanctioned person on the SDN list, on the list of sanctioned persons and property, which I think they are not allowed to, and that's what Coin Center's lawsuit is trying to vindicate, that basic principle and statutory interpretation of the underlying sanctions laws. But if they are able to do that, then this doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter if an address can be a shared secret and not something that is public and therefore not likely to end up on the SDN list, because if they can put that sort of more abstract thing on the SDN list, even if it's not somebody's property, then they can put Zcash, the Zcash shielded pool, describe it however you want, on the SDN list. They would write Zcash shielded pool, and then any evidence that anybody is sending any transactions to that shielded pool or taking transactions out of that shielded pool can be used to charge those persons with felony sanctions evasion. And sanctions evasion is the civil penalties are strict liability. So you wouldn't even have to show that they intended to do this or wanted to do this for a particular malicious purpose. You just need to show the transaction and the fact that this person actually ended up signing their private key or something like that. And maybe that would be a harder evidentiary burden to reach, given the nature of shielded transactions. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure, but I don't think they'd have too much trouble charging you with that. So that's a very bad outcome. I think it's an extra legal or illegal outcome. It means we've failed to constrain by rule of law the authority of the Department of Treasury, because Congress has only empowered the Department of Treasury to sanction persons and the property of persons, not things in the abstract like the Zcash shielded pool. But in that world where Coin Center loses its lawsuit, and the Van Loon lawsuit in the Fifth Circuit, which is challenging the same authority, where we lose those two lawsuits, that is on the table. And so that particular question about shielded addresses is sort of irrelevant, because it means that the U.S. sanctioned authority is way broader than anyone ever thought it was. And it doesn't matter if they have to, they don't have to narrow things down to an address in order to sanction them. They don't even have to narrow them down to a real person or real property. They can sanction things in the abstract.
I do have a little bit more information from the quantum question. The person who asked that, they said the relevance of the post-quantum thing was that you can make a good technical argument that people using addresses in this way are doing so for good security reasons rather than to evade regulations.
That's very interesting. And there are a small number of folks in Congress and at the agencies who care about the coming quantum computing crisis, which I'm glad there are a few. And that would be a good way to sort of build coalitions, I would say, with some of those members of Congress who might not care particularly about Zcash, but would care that the technologies we're developing are, in many cases, the solution to their concerns about long-term information security.
All right. Sorry, a couple of those. On the quantum computing, yeah, I don't have, and it is a thing that is coming. There's some experiments about quantum computing now, and I'm mostly familiar with it in the context of encryption and making sure that encryption algorithms are post-quantum, because the idea is that quantum computers will be really good at breaking a cryptography that is pre-quantum. And that gives some resilience to that early and often. But on the sort of another sort of embedded point there, or maybe just again taking it up a level, is that there can certainly be times in which the way that a technology works is able to provide some protections to the users that are resistant to existing regulatory regimes. I mean, then one is designing it to fit within the regulations and still provide the properties. Well, that's a great approach, because there you are, being lawful. In some cases, it is to make it resistant to the thing that well, if somebody wants to do it, they have to get a warrant because there's no way of doing it remotely. They have to come to your house and take your thing, and that can help preserve rights. But if you're going to a policymaker and a regulator, if you're trying to explain the position as, haha, we've designed this technology so you can't get us, you're actually powerless here, so you might as well give up and go home. They do not give up and go home. They are perfectly willing in many legislatures to pass a law or a rule that says something impossible must be done if you're in response to an answer that something is impossible. And in a court case, impossibility may be something that you could say, oh, you gave me this order, this injunction, it was impossible to comply with. I should not be held liable for not being able to do impossible things. So it's not the end of it, but it won't be, for lack of trying. And a lot of people in this space do not understand the technologies. And if you say, well, we got a quantum this and mumbo jumbo, and therefore you can't regulate, they won't be for lack of trying for them to do it. And Peter was explaining one way someone might do it. It might be other ways, but it is best to use the technology, have a defensible use for it. I like this a story that this is for use of privacy. It is for use of a security. It's a good thing, but don't rely only on technology to be able to. You have a whole, or you need the law, the policy, and the technology. One of my themes.
Okay, well, there's a couple more questions. Let me see if I can work them in here real quick. Given there are several cross-chain projects ongoing within the Zcash community, referring to Maya, Zavex, Filecoin, and Brave, what is the regulatory landscape for those projects, and what should we do to foster and nurture them in this context?
I think those are great, but those are some of the ones I'm excited most about as a community member and a user. What can we do to foster them? That's I don't want to turn this into a dev fund discussion, but that could be a component of that discussion when you all move to that.
I think I don't know the technical specifics of these projects, so I'll speak broadly about bridges. A lot of the issues that we're now looking at with the Samurai Wallet indictment and the Tornado Cash charges are pretty directly applicable to bridges, to the extent the bridge has some sort of facilitative role in moving people from one chain to another. There's going to be a question as to whether they fit into the definition of money transmitter, and therefore they can be prosecuted as doing unlicensed money transmission. Now, we have a whole post about this on coincenter.org about the Samurai Wallet indictment and the recent reply brief from Tornado Cash, where the DOJ is sort of really starting to champion this incredibly broad theory of unlicensed money transmission. If the DOJ triumphs in this incredibly broad theory of unlicensed money transmission, then building things like bridges is going to be one of several activities, possibly wallets as well, which is even more fundamental in some ways, but one of several activities that would be potential direct targets for these prosecutions. And I'll just briefly summarize that post. You should go find it on coincenter.org. It's our most recent post about Samurai Wallet. The DOJ is just plain wrong from a rule of law perspective. We've had 10 years of guidance from FinCEN saying that money transmission is accepting and transmitting from one person to another, and that means having at least brief independent control over the financial assets being transferred. And so FinCEN's guidance here, I think, has been clear. And suddenly the DOJ is saying, no, you don't actually need to control the funds if you're doing anything that sort of facilitates the movement of funds on chain, or say from one chain to another, you're doing money transmission. That is an extremely dangerous argument. I think it's an incorrect argument on the law, but it's one that will have to be fought by the Tornado Cash defendants, the Samurai defendants, and possibly in future regulatory actions, depending on whether it's interesting. I don't know if FinCEN, the regulators on point here, even agree with that characterization. They certainly disagree 180 degrees from that characterization in all of their published guidance and regulations to date. But I don't know if they're probably not going to come out on the record and say that they disagree with the DOJ. But I'm very curious whether FinCEN will defend its past guidance against this now overbroad theory promulgated by the DOJ, change its guidance, stay silent. And so there may also be regulatory action to look out for on this front. But this is hugely consequential, not just for bridges, but bridges are sort of one of the prime areas where you could imagine unlicensed money transmission charges being abused by prosecutors.
Well, hey, we are just a couple of minutes from our time. This has been a fantastic discussion. If anyone wants to say anything to wrap, this would be a great time to do that. Any closing comments before we call this the end of day 2 for ZconV?
Privacy is normal.
Okay, that's a great way to end. Hey, well, thank you all for your time. Thanks to the community for the great questions. Thanks to the foundation for coordinating this and making this all possible. Great day, covered a lot of ground. So let's all keep up the good work and just get back to it. Take care, everyone.